Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, I cannot wait to introduce our guest to you. But before I do, I want to thank some people that we always thank. We want to thank brassandwinds.com. The Mighty Quinn Brass and Winds are where we at the Willow School go when we need brass or wind instruments, and we think you should go there too. Check them out at brassandwinds.com. You're watching Truer MU, The Truth About Music. If you like what you see, please push the like button. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I think our conversations go a little deeper than the usual when it comes to music and other things. And in that vein, I want to introduce our guest to you. This is one of a number of interviews that I've done with fellow Oberlin students. And like some of those interviews, this is someone I haven't seen in maybe 25, 30 years, or even spoken to. But unlike those interviews, this is someone I hadn't expected to speak to again and had forgotten about to some extent until I saw him again on Facebook. And his name is Sam Farmer. And as to the reasons we want to talk to him, well, he is an author, but this also diverges quite into music and some other things. Let me tell you about Sam before we say hello. Sam Farmer is a neurodiversity community self-advocate, writer, author, public speaker, and consultant for Florco, a company that leverages virtual reality technology in teaching social, communication, and life skills for neurodiverse individuals. He is the author of A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, Small Steps, Challenges, and Triumphs Through an Autistic Lens. Sam, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Adam. Great to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, one of the key topics we're going to be discussing is the autism spectrum and your place on it. For some of our guests, they have really no idea what the autism spectrum is. Could you start by telling us, fairly briefly, what is autism? What is the autism spectrum?
Well, entire books have been written on this subject, and many of them, but at a very, very high level, there's more than one way to look at something, and autism is one of those things. Traditionally, historically, and advocates like me are trying to flip this script. It's thought of as a disorder. We call that kind of the medical model around autism, where in the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual that many clinicians will use to make diagnoses, whether medical or psychiatric, it's defined as a disorder and often treated as being more about deficit and challenge and hardship, where in reality, autism can also encompass many unique attributes, unique abilities, talents, which kind of echoes not so much the medical aspect, but what we call the social model of autism, which basically states that autism is one among many, many neurotypes that naturally exist in the human population. We've existed for as long as humanity has existed. And our neurotype just happens to be in the minority. And for reasons that are very regrettable, it's been stigmatized and pathologized and treated as something that, if at all possible, should be fixed or cured. But we don't look at it that way. A lot of people will disagree with me on this, and that's fine. You have people looking at it from the medical model point of view, and others like me who do look at it from the social model point of view. Again, more than one way to look at things. And so there are challenges, there are deficits, and there are hardships, some of which stem from stigma and others of which don't. But then there are, again, unique attributes and talents and capabilities and just a different way of thinking about the world around us. And those differences are kind of in the areas of learning and thinking differences, differences in how we sense the world around us. There are sensitivity related challenges and unique characteristics. Many on the autism spectrum tend to be very good at analytical thinking. We tend to look at things at face value in very literal um, terms. We're also very good with creativity, with pattern detection, uh, but just to name a few. And we care very deeply about things like human rights. We care very deeply about social justice. I think in part because historically we've gotten the raw deal as far as human rights and social justice is concerned, what with the stigma that we're up against. Uh, and you've got folks like Albert Einstein, who, based on what we know about him, he hadn't been diagnosed, but it's all but certain that he was likely autistic. You've got musicians, including David Byrne of Talking Heads fame, the lead singer of that band, publicly came out as autistic. You've got actors like Dan Aykroyd, Daryl Hannah. You have thoughts around the possibility that maybe Mozart, Beethoven, creative minds, minds that didn't think the way most other people thought in their time, who could very well have been diagnosed based on what we know about them, and a whole slew of just all kinds of other well-known individuals who have either been known to be autistic or likely were but never got diagnosed.
Now,
So
one of the things I learned about the autism spectrum, and it's something that's fascinated me for years, is that autistic individuals, if you can use that term, are not the same. It's a spectrum because really each person is different within the realm of the autism spectrum.
correct.
And so the question I want to know is how would someone know if they were on it and no one told them?
That's a great question. Um, there are people who self-diagnose based on what they learn from other autistics' lived experiences, that if you listen to others who are autistic and who talk about their challenges, how they've experienced life, they might say to themselves, well, what they're saying sounds very familiar to me in terms of my own experiences. They might make that connection. This is where it's very important if you want to learn the truth about autism, to learn it from those of us who are autistic, who walk in these shoes, where oftentimes um, people are only listening to non-autistic individuals, which is fine. It helps to hear a variety of different viewpoints, but autistic people, with respect to what you just brought up, Adam, are a critical component of who ought to be sitting at the table, so to speak, metaphorically, if somebody is thinking about or deciding or trying to figure out if they're autistic or not. But oftentimes it will be a diagnosis. In my case, and I write about this in the book, I went to a neuropsychologist. I had a neuropsych evaluation, which led to the diagnosis. I did various skill building work with clinicians after that diagnosis who upheld its legitimacy. And that's how I know for sure that I'm autistic, but I'm a proud autistic. I had to work very, very hard to work towards accepting it and ultimately even embracing it, trying to rise above the stigma and just be my true, genuine self, to live my truth. And that's what I've done and will continue to do as a perhaps counterintuitively speaking, proud autistic.
You learned about this when you were 40 years old, isn't that
Yeah,
correct? And
late
that
diagnosed.
is that typical or is that unusual?
It's becoming more and more unusual because of how different autism is being diagnosed today and in recent years than when I was younger. For example, at Oberlin and throughout grade school, I had no clue. If somebody looked at me and said, "You're autistic," I'd be like, "What? That came out of left field." It's being diagnosed very, very differently. And what I feel is a good thing is that because of that, today's young people are considerably more likely to be diagnosed early, which is ideal. Whereas because of my generation, and there are those of us who are late diagnosed, who kind of were born in the late 60s or earlier or in the 70s, some of us kind of look at ourselves as the quote unquote lost generation, not to be confused with the lost generation in the writings of F. Scott Fitzgerald in the 1920s, but in our own way in the autism community, the lost generation, because for a big, big chunk of our lives, we didn't have a complete picture of who we were. Um, I was very, very fortunate to have some sense of who I was. I had a lot of good help from smart, caring, kind people. I had two parents who arguably knew very well what they were doing when they raised me. I associated with all the right people, got the right help, thankfully was born with a good head on my shoulders. I was very, very fortunate to grow up in a well-off family with financial resources that not everybody has access to. And so, with all those factors, and perhaps sadly, and for all the wrong reasons, that I'm white and that I'm male, that I had a halfway decent picture of who I was pre diagnosis. But that is far from the truth for many of us, regrettably, in our community. Um, again, my skin color, my gender identity, my socioeconomic status growing up, all worked in my favor. I would prefer to have a more level playing field. But for that reason, I was able to have friends. I knew enough about myself to know that deep down I was a good person. My friends were people who were able to see past my social um, idiosyncrasies, quirks, um, social skills challenges. They were able to see past all that and see the good in me. So I knew that much about myself. Of course, I knew that I was good at music. In high school, I was a tennis player and a cross country runner, a good student. I did well enough in those sports to be able to compete on our sports teams. So I knew that about myself, of what I was good at. And I was able to leverage all of those special interests and capabilities and passions uh, to build some semblance of self-esteem. But nonetheless, self-esteem, as I write in the book, was for the longest time quite a battle in spite of all those things that I had going for me. So really my sense of self for the longest time, well into my 40s, post-diagnosis, was arguably half-baked.
I want to I want to go further with this, but in order to move there, I'd like to tell two stories about you that I remember from when we were in college together. Now, I'm taking a risk here because these stories might embarrass you. And if they do, I'm happy to cut them from the interview, but they might amuse you and they might spark a good conversation as well. So if you're
Sure,
willing,
Adam, go ahead. Yeah,
okay, all right.
go
So
ahead.
I wouldn't say you and I were friends that we hung out, but we certainly were acquaintances and we got along very well.
Indeed.
And we
Yes.
were in the choir together. And I one of the strongest memories I have of you is that you gave a concert of your songs at the Cat and the Cream, and me and a friend went to see you. Now,
Yes.
I still remember a number of these songs, but the concert left a very strange impression on me. For instance, I can remember one of these songs very well, and I want to sing a little of it to you. Uh, and it went like this: Johnny's coming home today. It's so long since I've seen my good friend. Johnny's coming home. And the funny thing is, I even remember the melody: Johnny's
Oh,
coming
that's
home
funny.
today. It's so long since. I was like, this song
Wow.
has a great melody. It's got a great rhythm. But the problem was that was all there was to the song, that Johnny's coming home. And I was like, what? I don't understand this song. He's just singing that Johnny's coming home. That's not a
It's
song.
interesting.
It's just, I was like, I left the concert and all the songs were kind of like that. Like they were all very well crafted and you sang them with such passion. But from a songwriting standpoint, for the audience, they made no sense. They were like they were like approximations of songs. And I just left thinking, what's going on here? Why would anybody see? That was the thing that was missing. That's one of the stories. Do you want to talk about that?
That's interesting. It's a really, really old song that later I would revise because often as a songwriter, you rewrite. You just don't just write new songs, you rewrite old ones that you see flaws. But it's interesting that that song, as I wrote it, had the verses and the repeating choir or chorus portion. It may be that my intent of how I'd want the song to be heard got lost because back then I struggled vocally in that setting, in spite of the fact that I was a good enough singer to be effective in a choir setting, as you know. But particularly back in those days, prior to me having any serious vocal training, which I would get later in life, um, I would maybe attribute your perception of the song, Adam, to my singing struggles. Even though I wasn't all that good of a singer, I still sang because I enjoyed doing it. And at a venue like the Cat and the Cream, you could get away with that. But if I heard a recording of that concert today, I'd be cringing because I'm my own worst critic, as many of us musicians, I think, tend to be.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't the singing that struck me. I thought your singing was fine.
Interesting.
It was the lyrics that confused me. It was the fact that
Yeah.
there was no story to the song. That you'd think that, okay, so Johnny's coming home. Why do you want Johnny to come home? Why did Johnny leave? All the details that would make the song, like for you, the picture was complete. You knew all about why you wanted Johnny to come home, but you never tell us in the song. That's the point I'm getting at. There was
And
the
that's a valid point, Adam, because lo and behold, I would end up scrapping those lyrics and I reinvented the song to be about a whole nother subject years later.
yeah,
The songs you rewrite, the starting point, you rewrite it because initially it fell short. You're
yeah.
right, the song did fall short. I saw its shortcomings later in life and I reinvented it. And I've done that many times. with all kinds of songs. But yeah, that might be an example of where, with my autism and with my thinking differences, again, there are learning and thinking differences. What to me could be a legitimate set of lyrics for a song could be very different to the ears of somebody non-autistic, and that's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
With diversity all around us, dissent is going to be inevitable. And so, with my song, with my book, with the many articles that I have on my website, I know that what I have to offer creatively is going to resonate with some people, but not with others. And I'm perfectly fine with that.
That's great. And that's what you need in order to write songs is you have to have that attitude.
Indeed.
Here's
Indeed.
the other story. Maybe less embarrassing, but interesting nonetheless. This happened when we were in choir, and it was, I don't remember the exact scenario, but we were all standing around, and you went to the piano out of the blue and you started playing Misty. And here's the
Yes.
thing I mean, you played it, you were just phenomenal. You sat down and you played this freakishly good cocktail lounge Misty. And okay, here's the funny thing. First of all, nobody asked you to do this, and it was kind of like, why are you doing this? But at the same time, you were so good, and that I had never heard you play before. I didn't even know you played the piano, and you sat down and you just knocked this freakishly good performance out. And then that was the
Thank
last
you,
time I
Adam.
ever, yeah. And then I never heard you play again. The whole scenario was just sort of strange. Like you zapped down out of nowhere, played the piano, and woof, the whole experience is gone again. Very odd.
Yeah. Depending upon the dynamics of the situation and depending upon whatever mood I was in at the time, I would either sit and play just spontaneously or I wouldn't. Crapshoot.
Yeah.
Um, but to this day, I'll play Misty in subtly different ways from one time to the next, because that's often how it works with jazz, and particularly with me as an improviser. Um, some thought that maybe I played it too similarly between different instances. I did play it more than once at Oberlin. Um, but whatever, that's just the way I played piano.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I'm proud to this day of my interpretation of that song. It's one of my better interpretations, which explains why I would often sit down and play it. But yeah, it's just variables that determine whether or not you do something in the given moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciate you allowing me to share these stories with you, and
Sure.
that you're open to hearing them. Did you, who you said you studied jazz at Oberlin, as did I. Both of us on the side, I think. Was Neil Creaky your teacher?
He was
I'm so glad to hear that.
for a couple of semesters.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
if you remember Sanford Margolis,
I do.
Sanford Margolis had a student, um, if I remember correctly, by the name of Art Koo.
Okay.
And Art, as a student at Oberlin, was my jazz piano teacher my freshman year,
Okay.
taking secondary lessons. And then it would be in my sophomore and also in my senior years that I studied with Neil. For whatever reason, in junior year, I felt I should have a break from jazz piano lessons.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first year in the Oberlin College Choir. But freshman, sophomore, senior years, it was Art and then it was Neil.
Well, I've interviewed a number of Neil's students, and for me, one of my secret missions is to let the world know about one of the greatest unknown pianists who ever lived.
Oh,
Can you?
without question.
Will you talk about your time with Neil, please?
What sticks out to me about Neil, a couple of things, really was just how genuinely good a person he was, kind, patient, likable, decent human being, just all those things you'd want in a teacher. But musically, what sticks out to me more than anything that he really ironed into my head of the importance of being a good jazz pianist is that when we improvise, to do so lyrically. He placed a great emphasis on lyricism, particularly with respect to jazz and improvisation. And at the time, I didn't really understand that as well as maybe I should have. For whatever reason, I got more caught up in the chromatic harmonies and the different A and B form chords and the different ways to voice a major or a minor or a dominant or a diminished chord. And I was too focused on the harmony to really be serious about what my right hand would be doing melodically. And he kind of woke me up to that. And overwhelmingly today, and for years now, as a pianist, not that harmony doesn't matter, of course it does, but my primary focus is on melody and on playing and improvising lyrically so that what I play, somebody listening to it could sing it.
Yeah.
He really placed a great deal of emphasis on that. And to me, that was, I think, the greatest value he brought to me as a jazz piano teacher of mine,
I'm so
more than
grateful for
anything.
you. Thank you so much for that because I find that that is the way I play jazz piano too. And I think I owe him the same debt, but I don't think it had occurred to me that it had originated with him. Thank you.